So the kink that I've actually chosen to go into in this episode is gonna be fat worship and to some extent even more belly worship.
Oh,
And
surprise, surprise.
surprise, surprise. I don't know what you're talking about. It's a fascinating and amazing sub kink, and to some it's gonna be very obvious, but it might not actually be that obvious as some might think. So what is it? It sounds very obvious. It really what it says. It's about fat being worshipped, being adored, being admired, and would kind of think that within fat admiration and fetishism, that's always going to be the case. And I hope it is for everyone. We all like fat people. That's why we're all here. But as a kink aspect in and of itself, in the way I had it in mind for the kink matrix, it's that it's somewhat of a counterpart to the teasing and humiliation aspect within fetishism. So
Hmm.
while humiliation, for example, often overlaps with fetus being more on the submissive side of a power play if you choose to have one. Worshipping would be kind of more the dominant counterpart of it. So it can be physical, it can be worshipping specific body parts or size in general, or it can be more of a characterization, meaning like elevating the feedee or the receiver of that worship as kind of like royalty, or I've heard even like people referring to their feedees as deities within a roleplay scenario. So that's basically where I come at when I was thinking about fat worship or belly worship specifically. And belly is just one body part, but there can obviously be other kinds of fat body parts that you choose to worship. So where does it come from? And are there like specific origins? And this one is obviously a lot more vague than the wonderful blueberry episode that you did.
Yeah.
But I do think there's like some things in history that we can like look back on, because when we look at a lot of old deities that old civilization used to worship, but even later, like when we look at how some of the depictions of Romans or even just royals in medieval ages were fat was worshipped as this kind of status symbol. And I definitely think that's kind of some of the origin that there might be to this whole like fat worship.
I think you have a really good point in that, kind of the celebration of excess has like a maybe it's just our deeply fetist scurry brains can't comprehend it, but I
Yeah.
could never imagine, I could never imagine worshiping the absence of a belly. Like there is no like skinny contrapositive for this type of thing. It's a celebration of that which is, not that which is not. And there are some people who I'm sure are going to be very, very happy and very, very pleased at the fact that they've, lost weight or they don't have the belly they used to have. And I suppose that's all well and good. But in terms of like worshiping that, and or like, treating it as, this like almost I don't want to say spiritual, but like this abundance, this, that seems deeply tied to like to notions of fat that we've processed once societally and now kind of in our own little corner.
Yeah.
That concept seems to go along with it pretty nicely.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it in terms of what it's not. So we're going to assume that like anyone listening to this podcast, unless they've just gotten deeply lost on YouTube or the algorithms are not functioning properly and you're being directed here by like a I don't know, how to make Thanksgiving stuffing video. Um,
Yes.
you know, if as long as that's not happening, we assume that on some level you're into fat. And if that's the
Definitely, yeah.
case, we know it expresses it in itself in a myriad ways. So like how would you treat belly worship different from, say someone who's into like, weight gain teasing or
Mhm.
humiliation or kind of more of that, like you definitely like it, but it comes out as
You
kind of
like it
more
in
mean
both of those
spirit.
examples, you know. You
Yeah.
like it in both of those instances. But yeah, when you're actually focusing on teasing, you're to some extent playing into how being fat is this taboo, and how like titillating it can be to just kind of use use nicknames that used to have a more like negative connotations, like piggy or stuff like that, or like teasing that actually kind of teases someone for, oh, look how fat you've gotten, you don't even fit into your clothes. And there's obviously it's always, or it should always be, coming from a very like loving place, but it does put the receiver a lot of times into this more submissive role.
Mm-hmm.
While the belly worship would be, for example, I've seen a lot of parallels for people who are into size contrast, people who are into, for example, like squashing or face sitting. You know what I mean? As soon as the
Sure.
feeder or the encourager or the admirer tends to be more on the submissive side themselves, it'll often turn into this kind of like special form of like worshiping the receiver, like the feedee
And
in
kind
this
of
example.
being subservient to
Mm-hmm.
that massiveness.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna float a somewhat weird literary reference here. I'm going back real far, to Ovid,
Mm-hmm.
the Roman poet, and the Pygmalion, the other type of pig we're talking about here. The Pygmalion, where famously someone built a sculpture and then fell in love with it. I
Oh
think there's
gosh.
also
Yeah.
kind of that ass, and you've seen that trope repeated again in like My Fair Lady, or
Mm-hmm.
even Frankenstein, or Weird Science, or stuff, Mannequin,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Definitely. There's so many adaptations of that kind of like
That
story.
too.
Yeah.
But you can also kind of draw that parallel, that through line with feedism, where you worship the thing you create. If you're a
Mm-hmm.
feeder and you work hard
Yeah.
to put this huge belly on this person who is typically might not have anywhere near as huge a belly, but for your hard work and influence,
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense to kind of make sense, maybe not make sense, none of this makes sense, but it's
All of this
understandable.
makes sense. What are you
All
talking
of this,
about?
yeah, well, it makes sense to us.
Yes.
But it's understandable that you would want to really revel in that creation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously it's also teamwork, but I think there's kind of, I can certainly see the appeal, in working, and this is a little bit of inside baseball here, but kind of working with a partner for over weeks and months and years, and meals and thousands of calories and this and that. There's a sense of pride and a sense of joy, that you feel knowing that you put those pounds on them, or I've seen it the other way too, or
Mm-hmm.
that they put those pounds on me.
Yeah.
And you you want to be happy with the thing you made, so the urge to kind of to treat it particularly specially, even up to the level of worship, kind of makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Another way that I saw where it often might overlap with Fideism is like very specific like role play scenarios that you'll also see in weight gain fiction, for example. And that's this fantasy of I've actually seen it more with like dominant male gainers,
Yeah.
gay gainers as well as some straight gainers, that they want to have this servant who just provides them food
Bring
all
me
the time.
food. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, sure.
That ties like strongly into BDSM to the point where it almost borders outside of fetishism. But when we're talking, like we're still talking about them gaining weight, about them being fat, but it's still something that in my opinion goes into this worship, because as I've said in the beginning, it can be physical, meaning like worshiping very specific body parts or the size in general, but it can also be more on this character level where you worship this status role that the feedee has and the receiver of that worship has.
Well, it definitely seems like it's kind of in a role reversal of what how the kink used to be publicly perceived, as it was always going to be a dominant feeder and a subservient feedee.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, that's 100% a trope, which is underrepresented historically in the kink, but is gaining more as we kind of become more inclusive of non-traditional approaches to it, where we have either like someone's royalty or a god or goddess or something,
Mm-hmm.
like just and demanding tribute and
Yeah.
and what's theirs. And I know that there are some supplicants who are all too willing to provide tithes and offerings.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Even
sure.
especially for people who are into contrast, for example, like it seems to be also this flip side to contrast, that the reason why you're so much into this huge size difference is because this huge size difference is so imposing, and it's definitely something that I'm into, for example, because it feels like humiliation, for example, has always been something that felt very alien to me, even though I completely
Mhm.
understood it coming from this very loving place. it always felt like, because size has always been something so fascinating to me, and especially with me being as a smaller feeder, it always felt so natural to also add this worshipping part of it. That is like, I'm so tiny and look at this huge, amazing, wonderful belly, That's, I don't know, that's just
Yeah.
where I came from. Yeah.
No, I think no, I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's certainly an aspect of the kink that I personally enjoyed being on the receiving end. It's good to feel like the king every once in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. I think that really hits on a lot of the appeal of belly worship, both from the worshiper and the recipient of the worship.
This week we wanted to thank our Patreons Butterfly Blob and Plumpen, Ayanami, Rorik and Salad Dodger for making this episode happen. If you want to do the same, you can do so at patreon.com/h4m.
I'm so hungry, yeah, I'm hungry. I'm so